Okay, so welcome along, everyone. Hola a todos. Welcome. It's great to see you all. Thanks for coming along. It's a very sunny evening here. I'm going to say a few quick words about the format of our seminar this evening. Then Sean will share some information about how we're going to organise our translations practice. Then what I want to do is just put the seminar in context in relation to our work at Financial Justice Ireland and to introduce the theme of the evening. Then I'll introduce our speakers and hand over to them. So just in terms of the structure of our seminar this evening, we're going to have two 30-minute, 20 to 30 minute presentations. First from Professor John Barry, and then we're going to hear from Tatiana Roa Avendaño. So what we're going to invite you to do is to use the Zoom chat box to leave questions or comments that we'll return to after each of the presentations. So we'll get a flavour of each of these comments or questions after each presentation, and we'll fully return to these at the end of the two presentations, opening up into a more of a plenary sort of discussion. So what I want you to do then, after we have our open plenary session, we'll just do a really quick round of evaluations. I want to share an evaluation form with you just at the end of our session here today. So I'm going to hand over to Sean to explain how our translations practice is going to work this evening, because we do have people from international guests here. So Sean, welcome and thanks for taking on this task here this evening.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sean. I'm just here to support with anybody Spanish speaking or not a native English speaker or not an original English speaker who speaks Spanish. So mostly I will be supporting with the questions and answers at the end. But I'm also here for any additional support. So if anybody is having trouble following particularly John's presentation, you can send me a direct message and I can put through some Spanish notes through the chat. We're just kind of doing it that way to not interrupt the flow by having consecutive interpretation, but just to provide that extra support if anybody needs it.
Great. Thanks, Jan. Okay, so what I want to do here is to put the theme of our seminar here this evening into context in relation to us as Financial Justice Ireland, and how we got to come up with this topic, this really key topic that we're going to address here this evening. So as many of you know, we have a very specific remit at Financial Justice Ireland to look at economic and financial justice. And we know that we can't get to economic justice without digging deeper into the root causes of poverty, inequality, social and economic crisis, and existential threats such as climate change. We're coming up to our 30-year anniversary here at Financial Justice Ireland. We're going to celebrate this in September, October. And over this time, our campaigning and educational work on these issues of social and economic crisis and existential threats. So we can think of this block of 30 years as a story of two halves. Before 2008, there was a very strong focus on education and campaigns on debt issues and debt cancellation campaigning in solidarity with global South countries. Since 2008 onwards, the bank bailout, the IMF coming in, and the austerity that followed, the focus of the work broadened also to include the impact of these global financial structures and institutions in Ireland, and Ireland's role then in facilitating these structures, particularly in corporation tax issues. So our education work focuses on these big meaty issues of the economic and financial system and connects them to the issues such as climate, gender, housing, and others. Organisationally, at Financial Justice Ireland, we've gone through quite a bit of change in the last few years, and we have a completely new team in place. Tomas McDonough as director, Vicky Donnelly is our outreach and education worker, and myself, Hilary Darcy, as the Global Citizenship Education Coordinator. We're really acutely aware here that we've inherited from our predecessors an amazing body of work for educating and campaigning on economic and financial justice issues. So we got to this idea of holding the seminar topic this evening, getting beyond growth, colonialism and extractivism, in terms of us thinking about how we can dig deeper into the root causes of poverty, inequality, social and economic crisis and existential threats. And our speakers this evening explore the intersections of the multiple crises we're facing in their work as researchers, educators, and as activists. John Barry is a father, a recovering politician, a professor of green political economy in the Centre for Sustainability, Equality, Climate Change at Queen's University Belfast. He's also the co-chair of the Belfast Climate Commission, a member of the Committee of Climate Change's Economics Advisory Group and Adaptation and Resilience, a member of the Sustainable Future Committee of the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust. What keeps him awake at night is the life opportunities and future well-being of his and other children in this age of our planetary emergency and the intersecting social and economic injustices within and between countries. What also keeps him awake at night is the following question. Why is it easier for most people to believe the end of the world than the end of capitalism and economic growth? His areas of academic activist research include post-growth and heterodox political economy, decarbonisation and decolonization, the politics, policy and political economy of climate breakdown, technical analysis of low carbon, just energy, and sustainability transitions, climate injustice-based nonviolent direct action and social mobilization, and the overlap between conflict transformation and these sustainability and energy transformations. His last book was The Politics of Actually Existing on Sustainability, Human Flourishing in a Climate Changed, Carbon-Constrained World, and he's currently writing a book provisionally entitled The Greatest Story Never Told, The Origins, Tyranny and End of Ecocidal Economic Growth. On top of all that, and most impressively of all, John Barry was one of Financial Justice Ireland's original bloggers in our Econowas series between 2014 and 2018. Tatiana Roa Avendaño is an environmentalist, educator, and researcher and founder of Sensat Agua Viva, which is Friends of the Earth in Colombia. Tatiana holds a master's degree in Latin American Studies from the UASB in Quito, Ecuador, and is a PhD candidate in the CEDLA, the University of Amsterdam in Political Ecology. She has written numerous articles and books on extractivism, water justice, and energy sovereignty. She's one of the signatories and promoters of the Eco-Social Pact of the South. As an activist, she's part of Oil Watch, the Alliance Against Fracking and Mining, and Energy Social Dialogue. She has also been part of diverse groups such as the Water Justice Alliance, Abya Yala Working Group on Political Ecology, Territorialities and Dispute, and the Resistance Working Group. So welcome, John and Tatiana. We're so delighted that you could join us this evening, and we're really excited to hear what you have to say. So we're going to start with Professor John Barry for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll hand over to Tatiana Roa Avendaño for a testifier presentation. We'll open then into more of a sort of open plenary discussion, drawing from some of the questions and comments that we have in the Zoom chat box. Okay, so are we ready to get into it? Yeah, good to go. So I'm going to start off, John, by asking you, let's lay the groundwork here to get into this topic. What exactly do the terms economic growth, degrowth, and post-growth mean?
Thank you, Hilary, and apologies for my very red face. I clearly sat out too long today in the sun. Tatiana, Irish people were not meant for the sun, as you can see. So these ideas of economic growth, degrowth, and post-growth, I would like to anchor them all in capitalism. And that's the current economic system that most of us happen to suffer within. And capitalism is a system of economic organization based around private property, for-profit production of goods and services, and orientated towards economic growth. So that's the most important thing for me about these ideas of growth, post-growth, and degrowth, is to see them as critical ways of looking at our current economic system. So our current system is ecocidal. And what I mean by that is that it's simply biophysically impossible for us to continue with an economic growth trajectory indefinitely, or for everybody on the planet to exist at the same level of economic growth as, say, your average person in Ireland or America. We simply haven't got enough planets. But having said that, and it's a misunderstanding, if you like, of the ecological critique of growth, is that a degrowth or post-growth position does not mean that everybody has to somehow go on a diet, on austerity. The reality is that within our societies and between our societies, there are many people who need to grow. They need to consume more, not less. So a post-growth or degrowth position is not about everybody reducing their consumption. Properly speaking, it means that we need to redistribute our economic benefits so that more people can enjoy goods and services for a decent human life. Because the reality is that, and the evidence is there, that a small minority of the world's population, the richest, the wealthiest, they are the ones who are causing most of the ecological damage on the planet. Many people in the world are already living very sustainably, not because they choose to, but because they're not consuming enough. So for me, a post-growth and degrowth position, and I don't like using the term degrowth. Degrowth has a very negative connotation. It's kind of, anti-growth, it's anti-aspiration. I much prefer the term post-growth, about a well-being economy. But within that, I just emphasize the fact that we're talking about a critique of capitalism. We need to understand the importance of class politics in all of this. The climate and ecological challenge is a class struggle. The people who are suffering the most around the world are the working class. The people who have least to bear responsibility are the working class. So we must never, ever buy into the ideological trap of thinking that our own individual consumption habits are the problem. So just to finish, the really important issue about growth, post-growth and degrowth is about who owns and controls the means of production. Do not be focused purely on consumption and income. That's the way in which neoliberalism and this very individualized response, we get an often green argument, somehow your own carbon footprint, that somehow if we all go on a plant-based diet or we all decide not to fly, these are important issues, don't get me wrong, but the really important issue is the causes of our ecological and planetary crisis lie in an ecocidal, growth-based, class-maintained system of production we call capitalism. And I'm simply using that as a descriptive term, not in any normative way. But we do have to understand that when we talk about these terms, we need to focus on production, not on consumption. And in our globalized economy, that includes the ways in which supply chains are globalized now, so that if you're like me and you can afford an electric car, that doesn't mean you have a green halo on your head. You've got to understand that the lithium, the cadmium, the zinc that's mined to produce the batteries for these types of technologies often come with very high human rights abuses, ecological damage, and so on. So for me, I like this discussion about growth, post-growth and degrowth, because it means we have to be clear-eyed about our transition pathways. But as I mentioned already, we need to focus on production, not just on consumption.
Great. Thanks for laying the ground there to help us understand, these different ways of thinking about growth and post-growth. And maybe moving on from that initial question, can you tell us about the colonial origins of economic growth in Ireland and globally?
Yes, I mean, this is part of my nerdy academic research. But just before I get into the historical origins of the colonial history of growth and so on, think about this, that in our contemporary capitalist societies, the ideal GDP, gross domestic product, or economic growth hero is a cancer patient driving an SUV, drinking a hamburger, swinging a can of Guinness, talking on the phone and divorcing his or her partner while causing a 20-car pileup. Now, every element of that horror story I've just told you adds to GDP. Ching ching, divorce, 2 houses. Ching ching, if there's children involved, there now needs to be 2 sets of toys. Ching ching, if there's 2 houses, maybe 2 cars are needed now. Ching ching, cancer treatment is going to, create more economic development. And actually, we need to really seriously think that that is an absolutely mad situation for our societies to be in. That things that we would normally view as negative or as a diminution in social welfare are actually added to GDP. And that's exactly the system we're in now. GDP, to put it very provocatively, in terms of economic growth, does not care if you're selling pornographic magazines or Bibles. Ching ching is all it cares about. In other words, we have created a system of economic judgment in terms of how well our economies are doing, which, eviscerates and avoids any political judgment in terms of what we judge to be good or negative for society. And the origins of this, sadly or interestingly or whatever, lie in Ireland. What we now call economic growth, which is GDP, gross domestic product, which is a measurement of economic value within an economy over a calendar year, usually, it lies in the colonization of Ireland by Cromwell in the 17th century. In other words, if you look back in what we now call GDP, and this is accepted even by mainstream economists, its origins lie in the expropriation, the extractivism, which I'm sure Tatiana will talk about. It lies in our unique historical experience on this island, where, as a European, largely white society, we were colonized before many other parts of the world were. And many of the practices of plantation, of expropriation, of the measurement of the value of the land and the people for export to the colonial power were practiced in Ireland. And it's with a man called, it's always a man, isn't it? If you're interested, a man called Sir William Petty. And he was a Cromwellian commander. And he was brought over to Ireland in the 17th century to measure the economic productivity of the land and people of Ireland as a way of paying back the Cromwellian soldiers who just invaded Ireland. So the army could be financing. But his statistical invention of, I won't bore you with the cadastrel, the way in which he did this is quite interesting, even though horrible from a historical point of view in terms of the colonization and the exploitation of our people and land. His invention in terms of what he called political arithmetic, the statistical measurement of the value of land and people, went on then to become the basis of what we now call economic growth. So the point is that economic growth, much like as Karl Marx described capitalism, for those of you who perhaps read or who don't know Marx, Marx said that capitalism entered the world dripping in blood and exploitation. And similarly with economic growth. Economic growth is born and based on an expropriating, exploitative, extractivist logic. And yet that is still the dominant way in which our media, in which, our economic system, and perhaps how most of you listening to me, most of us think that economic growth is good because we have some vague sense that, well, if the economy is not growing, it's kind of bad. And there are many reasons why we need to question this, but all I'm saying here is that if you look back at the origins of economic growth, it's not a happy story. Economic growth was not invented to benefit the working class. It was not created to benefit peasants. It was created by a colonial impulse to extract as much value from a colonized and expropriated land and people. And I would argue it still has that logic today. that whenever you see economic growth around the world being used or talked about, it's a basis for exploitation.
Great, thanks for that. And then continuing on, historically thinking about, you know, how things played out post-independence Ireland, how did the economic phases of economic development, in post-colonial Ireland play out, and how does this story in Ireland resonate or connect with other post-colonial countries globally?
Well, again, if you continue the story from the Cromwellian war and recolonization of Ireland, I mean, Ireland had been colonized for way before the 17th century. So the Cromwellian invasion and Sir William Petty and the development of what I'm now calling economic growth is only a new phase in the colonial, exploitation of Ireland. But if you continue that on, then it leads to, people that you may have heard of, like Adam Smith and the invention of modern economics, who then take up this notion of, the economic value of a land and its people, and effectively the invention of what we call, the economy, which is a monetary judgment or evaluation on economic activity in a society. And of course, what's interesting there is not just that it's colonial and exploitative, and it's not in the interest of the people that we're talking about, it's also very gender specific. So the unpaid work of women doesn't get included. So it's only what you can exchange on the market and get a monetary return on that's included in this notion of the economy. And that's included not just in the 18th and 19th century as we get the development of colonialism and imperialism with Britain and America and France and so on, now extending their reach and often using, as I say, the colonial practices of the British Empire that were first tried out in Ireland. But then we get to the development of modern economics. So modern economics is, strictly speaking, male stream economics. It very much is about a Western male-centered view of what the economy actually is. And this becomes codified in the early 20th century, in the 1930s, with the actual invention of what we now call GDP, gross domestic product. And this was a bunch of male academics and policymakers from mostly Britain, France and America and Canada, who invent this concept of GDP in the 1930s, largely in response to the economic depression that was happening at the time and the need to accurately measure the economy. But effectively, all of this means is that our contemporary understanding of the economy has to be understood against the backdrop of sexism, of racism, of colonialism, and most of these, I speak now as a university professor, in the teaching of economics, none of this is ever covered by in our teaching of our students. So our students understand GDP as this kind of neutral, objective concept of the measurement of the economy, and know nothing of the things I'm talking about here in terms of its roots in colonialism, exploitation, gender inequality, and so on. In a way, even if you disagree with everything I have to say, and I'm more than happy to answer questions on this, we have to at least, try and understand the origins of these words that we use, these terms that we use, like economic growth. And again, I'm probably being presumptuous, but many of us probably listening on the call tonight have a very dim, what does economic growth mean? We have some vague sense that it's important, but without understanding the full ramifications, it carries with it a lot of historical and exploitative baggage. And in a way, I'm happy to be corrected, but from my studies, it's on the island of Ireland, before the colonial powers of Europe start exploiting and raping and pillaging other parts of the world, they practice this in Ireland. Plantation, exploitation, the accurate measurement of the land and what it can produce. And that's why I think we in Ireland have a particularly unique historical experience, which often means that I think we have more resonance with many global South countries, because it's kind of odd as a white European society. We share that colonial history, which most other European countries don't. And one of which is, as I say, the invention of this concept of economic growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And so thinking about this whole idea of economic growth, or the argument for economic growth, it's often used to stave off arguments for wealth redistribution. Why do people buy into this? I mean, we know that the people who buy into this, who benefit from it the most, it's very clear and obvious, but most of us don't benefit from it. So why is it generally the consensus that this economic growth argument is, you know, just the safest way to keep the status quo?
Well, again, I'm happy to be corrected by those on the call, but I might be presumptuous in thinking that most of the people listening to me, we have this kind of view that economic growth is good, it's necessary. We're not quite sure what it means, but we just have this kind of sense that if we don't have economic growth, that it's bad. And often we hear these analogies. So I'll give you two analogies which are often used to justify the inequality producing aspects of economic growth. One is the very common, a rising tide raises all boats. I'm sure you've all heard that. Well, the sad reality is, well, if you're in a canoe and you're in a mega yacht, it does make a difference as to whether or not you're in a canoe or a yacht. And it's complete bullshit to perceive that somehow a rising tide raises all boats. In the Republic of Ireland in particular, where I've done some research, we have had the phenomenon of jobless growth. So we've had economic growth largely because of the large foreign direct investment, Google, Apple, and so on. So GDP, economic growth is looking great. There's no fucking jobs. Nobody in Dublin, Limerick, Cork, or anywhere else is benefiting from economic growth. But economic growth is celebrated by the political elites, and it benefits, a capitalist class because they can get accumulation, they can get power from this. That's the first issue. A rising tide does not raise all boats. The second one, and it goes more directly, Hilary, to the question you asked, is that it's this analogy of the cake, that somehow, if the cake gets bigger, who cares what your slice, your size of your slice is? Next year is going to be bigger. But the reality is, it does matter the size of the slice of the cake that you get, particularly when the ecological constraints are we cannot continually grow our economy. There simply isn't enough planet to enable us to continually grow our economy. That means that in the context of a non-growing economy, we have to deal with the issue of redistribution. And most of the arguments for economic growth, particularly you see amongst Fine Gael in the Republic of Ireland and other parties, it's about saying, oh, don't worry about redistribution. Redistribution is the politics of envy. It's, it's going to be a drag on economic development for everybody else. And it's a way of reducing claims about redistributing wealth in society more equally, because you promise people jam tomorrow. The slice of your cake will be the same proportionally next year, but it's going to be bigger. Now, in my view, that's a very neat ideological way of getting people to buy into growth. To say, well, let's not bother about redistribution. We just grow the cake and everybody can have a bigger slice. The reality is that why should some get a disproportionate amount of the cake in the first place? But also, as I say, the ecological situation is now we do not have the ingredients to grow the cake so much in the same way, that we do have to start looking at redistributing economic wealth more equally. So always be aware and have a sensitivity towards who are making arguments for growth for what purposes. Because here's the thing, I must finish on this. Most of economic growth does not benefit working class people. Most of economic growth benefits those who are already well off. So surely we should not now move on to a different economic model that's not so orientated towards economic growth, but orientated towards meeting the basic needs of people. So essentially, economic growth, in my view, is an ideology that's often used and mostly used to justify an unequal distribution of wealth in society.
Thank you. So yeah, thinking about how we get beyond this economic growth approach, the argument for economic growth, tell us some ideas and examples that inspire you, or what sorts of educational interventions can support us to get beyond economic growth, both in our thought and our action.
Well, for me, I think it's about having these discussions that we're having tonight, that there is a world of possibility where nobody should go to bed hungry, and everybody can have a house and have a decent, decent access to education, energy, transport, and so on. We don't need growth to produce that. Most of the growth, as I say, accrue to a small minority. So we don't need growth to improve the lives of our populations. And of course, that needs to be, defended, and the empirical evidence provided. I absolutely think it is there, and that once we let go of this myth that growth is the only way we can improve our lives, a whole new world opens up in terms of, in my view, a much more socialist or eco-socialist. And I'm just saying that purely functionally. Yes, there are ideological arguments in terms of, a less unequal society and so on. What I'm saying is the science is telling us now we cannot grow our economies, certainly in the global north, if we want to allow people in the global south. There are over 1 billion people on the planet today that live on less than $1 a day. We need to lift those out of poverty. Now, the only way we can do that is if we in the global north, we have to degrow in some ways and redistribute our wealth more equally. And we've got a lot of wealth already. There's enough wealth on the island of Ireland so that nobody has to go to bed hungry. We have enough to build houses for all. It's the fact that the wealth and the assets and resources are being locked up by a minority. So the proposition I'm suggesting here is one of abundance. It's one of, plenitude. It's one of giving people everything that they need for a decent life. Once we get over this unequal distribution of wealth and assets and resources, and that then would help us to deliver on global solidarity, because the world cannot afford either the super rich. We cannot afford those who are causing so much ecological damage on the planet. And we do need to tackle that class inequality to enable people in our own societies in Ireland and Britain and elsewhere, but also globally, to have the access to the basics of living a decent life. The one country that always is inspiring to me, and maybe Tatiana might like to comment on this, because it often comes out as the highest in terms of human well-being, is Costa Rica. Costa Rica does not have excessive amounts of economic growth or foreign direct investment and so on. It has high levels of equality. So it's got low levels of socioeconomic inequality. It's got high levels of natural capital, in other words, abundant natural resources. It's a very democratic society, which is another element of what I'm talking about here in terms of a decent, human life. So why is it we cannot follow countries like Costa Rica, or indeed Cuba? Cuba is another example of a country that, on fairly modest GDP and economic, output, because it's a more equal society, because it prioritizes public health, for example. Why is it that our societies with much more wealth that is badly, distributed, we have worse health outcomes in Ireland, North or South, than a country like Costa Rica or Cuba, which have much lower, objectively, economic output than we do? And for me, the answers are fairly simple. It has to do with a much more state interventionist, egalitarian economic system, which prioritizes not growth, but health. Imagine our society, let's end on this. Imagine a society that was organized towards maximizing not economic growth or GDP or foreign direct investment, that was maximized towards increasing mental and physical health amongst our populations. Now, to me, it seems like countries like Cuba and Costa Rica, they have moved in that direction where they're not focused purely on GDP economic growth, but they're focused on the very basics of well-being for their populations as measured by physical and mental health.
Great, thank you so much, John. We're going to turn to Tatiana now, but first I want to encourage everyone, please do use the Zoom chat box. Share any thoughts or questions that we want to bring into the open plenary, open discussion session that we'll have after we hear from Tatiana. So welcome, Tatiana. I'm going to share my screen. I have your amazing presentation slideshow here. So yeah, just bear with me while I do that. Let me see. Okay. Okay, let me just check in. You can all see that. Is that okay?
Okay, thank you, Hilary.
Thank you.
Thank you, yes. I prepared some slides to facilitate the understanding of my presentation. Okay, good afternoon in Latin America and good evening in Ireland. I would like to send a special greeting for Professor John Barry and Hilary to share this moment with you. It's very exciting, and I express my gratitude to Financial Justice Ireland for the kind invitation to this important event, and especially its director, Tom, who I have known for several years when he was working in Colombia. Thanks, John, for your brilliant presentation. There is also a history of colonization in Ireland, as in other small countries in the global north. I believe that these dialogues between the South and the North are a great importance in this time of crisis. Thank you. Next one, please. I would like to provide some contextual elements, especially focusing in Latin America. Next one, please. Okay, Latin America, like most of the world, is experiencing the implementation of the so-called new normal that emerged after the COVID-19 pandemic, which had been marked by chaos and instability. And this new global order reflects the exacerbation of multiple interconnected crises, including social, economic, political, ecological, health, and geopolitical aspects that mutually reinforce each other. We can say that we are living through in the civilization crisis. Next one, please. We are living in a time of great concern. Democratic institutions and practices are weakening all over the world, as well as in strengthening of extreme right-wing movements and authoritarianism. In Latin America, there are examples of this phenomenon. Brazil, for example, has experienced several years under the Bolsonaro government, which dismantled most of the democratic institutionality. Other prominent cases include Bukele in El Salvador. Maybe you know your policies, and maybe we can talk about other countries, other governments, not only Latin America, in other countries, include Europe. Next one, please. The increase in the culture, the other point is the increase in the culture of war at various levels, and also noteworthy as it is closely linked to capitalism colonialism and the exacerbation of patriarchy and racism. Economic sectors such as financial, hydrocarbon, agrobusiness, arms, corporate media, and pharmaceutical industry are the main perpetrator of the war against life, characteristic of the neoliberalism capitalism, like said John before me. This phenomenon represents significant challenge to global stability and the promotion of fundamental values such as equality, freedom, and justice. Next one, please. The war is against life and nature. Territories are devastated by militarization and escalating violence. Natural defenders included indigenous people, peasants, Afro-descendants, urban dwellers, young people, and women who protested for the territories suffer from systematic violence. The various wars happening in the world. Maybe we talk about, maybe we read news every day about Ukraine and Russia, but there are other wars in a war, but never we talk about this war, include in my country. And this war, the various wars happening in the world, I say, mostly driven by dispute over raw material and energy, have worsened the energy, humanitarian, and food crisis. Next one, please. I would like to talk shortly about extractivism and decarbonization. Next one, please. Horacio Machado, an Argentine academic and activist, argues that the conquests of America and colonialism mining were the midwives of capitalism. Machado referred to this process as a true civilization, an economy, political, social, and cultural system that continues to expand the exploitation of people and nature to unprecedented levels. Extractivism has marked Latin America, and as a consequence has led to increasingly complex crises in multiple dimensions. It has generated an economy that depends on export of raw material and energy, creating a rent-based economy and deepening social inequalities. Next one, please. Furthermore, extractivism suffers from certain pathologies and feeds on increasingly harming vicious circles. It deteriorates employment and causes environmental and social damage, brings violence toward workers, women, young people, and other forms of life. You can show in the slide a lot of pathology with of the extractivism. Next one, please. Currently, we are witnessing a new phase of extractivism that is amplified by the corporate-driven green transition. The predominant energy transition initiative maintain the inherent colonialism of the fossil fuel era, whether by seeking to change energy sources or improve production and consumption efficiency through digital technology. They promote digital technology, but in reality consume more energy, consume more material. Yeah, it's the idea that digital technology reduce energy, but it's not true. It's worse. Next one, please. This initiative exerts significant pressure on the global South, and as they demand strategic minerals such as cobalt, copper, rare earths, and lithium, intensify intensifying the competition for land dedicated to renewable energy projects. However, this green transition fails to question the pattern of production and consumption, isn't deepening existing inequality and compromising biodiversity and ecosystem. And the most big problem is we try to replace oil or fossil fuels with renewable energy, but in general, it's impossible to replace fossil fuel with this kind of energy. And we need to think how change our form of life. Next one, please. The concept of the decarbonization was, this concept was referred by my colleague, Breno Bringel. He is an academic and activist, Brazilian academic and activist from the eco-social and intercultural paths of Global South. It's driven by corporation and oriented toward the exportation of commodity to major powers. This leads to a new phase of environmental dispossession in the Global South, affecting the life of millions of people and compromising biodiversity and ecosystem and territory, in general territory. Next one, please. These false solutions supported by technological and digital control over life are what we refer to as energy colonialism or green extractivism in Latin America and in other parts of the world. Next one, please. Also, a new form of extractivism had consolidated in Latin America. Resistance is also strengthening. Thousands of people protest in the streets, again in the street and the road, and in many places in our countries, against extractivism and the green economy projects. However, as mentioned before, resistance comes at the high cost. Recent reports from Global Witness identify Latin America as the most violent region in defending nature, with Colombia, Brazil, Honduras, Mexico, Peru, and many other countries being the countries with the highest number of modern social leaders. Next one, please. And how to over extractivism? In Latin America, next one, please. While in the global north, there is a talk of the growth, in Latin America, we speak of post-extractivism or alternatives to development, or maybe post growth, like said John. But it's much more common use post-extractivism or alternatives to development. Post-extractivism propose a critique of the dominant development model, understanding the current crisis in a much broader sense, criticize productive progressivism, takes in account socio, environmental, and territorial conflicts, and propose a horizon of social ecology transformation. Making sensible or essential proposal for post-extractivism is not easy. And I will outline some measure of proposal put forward by social organization and academic working in this perspective. In this sense, there are proposals like environmental and economic components, and reconfiguring the trade in natural goods relating with energy and raw material, and thinking a market and a state regulation are necessary for transition, including comprehensive state reform and effective public policy. Post-extractivism approach should focus on alternative funding for poverty eradication, sustainable employment, education, and social security cover. Reorganizing public spending is essential in a post-extractivism approach. And how thinking the transition economic imply abandoning the idea the infinite growth and the adaptation of alternative economical approach. And there are another proposal like autonomy, regionalism, and selective decoupling from globalization. Next one, please. However, also we could say that in Latin America, the political debate on post-extractivism has been going on for more than a decade, especially during the first decade of this century, when there are a lot of progressive government in Latin America, like Ecuador, Venezuela, Brazil, Uruguay, and Honduras, including Honduras. Only 2 countries in the region have put forward concrete proposal that seek to open a path out of the extractivist trap: Ecuador and Colombia. John referred to Costa Rica, and maybe we can talk about the Costa Rica later, but I would like to focus in Ecuador and Colombia. But, however, thousands of experience and proposals emerged from local people and organizations, and I would like to refer to them briefly. Next one, please. In Ecuador, indigenous and environmental organizations that have fought against oil extraction for decades proposed to halt oil extraction in the Yasuni National Park to preserve biodiversity and protect indigenous people. This is a very important region in a war, especially in the Amazonas. The Yasuni ITT initiative aimed to keep over 1 billion barrels of oil underground in exchange for international payments. During many years, the Correa government put this proposal in the discussion in the COPs, in climate change COPs. However, the plan was abandoned in 2013, and drilling began in 2017. However, the young people, especially young people, continues fighting against this exploitation. And currently, a popular consultation is expected to determine the future of oil activity in the park. And if the consultation is successful, the oil infrastructure will be dismantled. And this is a very, very interesting proposal, because it could be the first precedent to dismantle oil industry in a region. Next one, please. In Colombia, a lengthy debate among social and environmental movements regarding the urgency of an energy transition led President Gustavo Petro to propose during his last campaign, 2018 and 2022 campaigns. Gustavo Petro take some of this idea to the indigenous environmentalists, include workers, oil workers and coal workers in Colombia. We discuss about the necessity of the needs of the transition, energy transition. And he proposed the suspension of oil exploration, the prohibition of fracking, and deeper water exploration, and the gradual closure of coal mines. In Colombia, there are very important movements against fracking and against other kind of the oil exploitation. Now, as President Gustavo Petro had set out to initiate a gradual process of moving away from economy and energy depends on oil and coal, and advancing toward energy and energy transition. However, the lobbying efforts of the oil and the coal industry had hindered the pace of change. It's not easy, of course. There are a lot of pressure, many sector pressure against to proposal, but people resist and try to support this proposal. Next one, please. Okay, like I said before, in Latin America, there are thousands of experiences that advance in terms of social ecological transition. These are experiences that connecting social and productive links, technologies, and cycle of nature, creating reflection on environmental justice. In several cases, this experience arises in resistance and as an alternative proposal to extractivism and to agro-industrial models. Next one. And the last one too. In Latin America, the debate on post-extractivism and alternatives to development has been enriched over time, with new elements emerging. People and organizations are building proposals that imply profound cultural transformation, involve change in the structure of production, distribution, and consumption. It's not only consumption, like say John. We need to see the production and the distribution too, and consume, of course, as well as in urban logics and our relation with nature. The urgency posed by the crisis of civilization demands that this proposal be strengthened immediately. As I mentioned earlier, the debate must open a dialogue between the South and the North, as the transformation must be global, not only regional. We need to think in a global scene, and of course in the local sense too. Thank you very much. Thank you, Hilary.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. Fascinating, and just a beautiful presentation, artwork as well. And finished on such a positive note there, and thinking about paths forward are really about a North-South partnership working together. And maybe that could be one of the questions that we come to at this point. How does that North and South relationship work? Or can we think of any examples of projects and initiatives and partnerships that we can look to as part of this? So that's one question we could dwell on for the moment. We can also have a look in the chat box, and anyone who has any comments or reflections to add into the chat box, please do use the text box here. I'm going to read a couple of comments. Actually, John, you have a comment here. Maybe I can ask you to read this out yourself or share it yourself.
Yes, it was more just to thank you, Tatiana. That was an absolutely wonderful presentation. Much better than me. And yet I'm the educator. I mean, the images are just, they're so much more evocative in terms of communicating messages. But the point I was making in the chat is that there's a dominant perspective in the global north that the green energy transition is around electric vehicles, wind farms, solar power, and so on. And very few people understand that we do not produce the materials that are required for these green technologies. They're, you know, in the global south, and they'll actually, they involve exploitation and destruction in the global south. But also, and this is the other point, is that these green technologies are not displacing fossil fuel use. We're simply adding, you know, green energy use to fossil fuel use. So it's more, I suppose, a comment or a provocation for those of us on this call than a question, is to realize that really what we should be doing is reducing our energy consumption in the global north, not necessarily, you know, saying that green energy is the solution, because, you know, the cheapest and most climate form of energy is the energy you don't use. So why don't we see in Ireland and other countries a focus on boring things like housing retrofit, you know, that, you know, to create, you know, energy efficient housing. That means we don't have to use so much energy to heat our homes and so on. But yet we don't get that really in our public discourse. It's all about, you know, renewable energy and so on. And so it's just a, I suppose, a comment that our framing of the energy transition in the global north is actually locking us into a form of, you know, neo-colonialism. That we have this green extractivism now, which many of us are not really aware of, even though we think the green transition with renewable energy, electric cars and solar power is all very good. But actually, if you trace the supply chains, it becomes very clear that this is not actually ecologically friendly at all.
Great. Thank you for that, John. And Rodrigo, could I invite you to share your question?
I would like to say something related with the, in general, with the question and with the comments and with the intervention of John. Maybe if I lost some words, I ask to see and your help. I think the big problem is we talk about this is a oil civilization, because, but the oil civilization is a fugaz. You say, ¿tú puedes decir fugaz?
Like fleeting.
Briefly.
Yeah. Fleeting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. I try to organize again my my head.
I
Oil
think
civilization. Sorry. O lo digo en español rápidamente. ¿Qué prefieres?
Sí, está bien. Solo que la línea está mal. I'm getting it's a little bit broken up. Or it's me. Soy yo.
You can listen me. You can listen me.
I
Hilary,
think other people can hear you. Okay, I think it might just be me. My apologies. Lo siento, Tatiana. Creo que es mi línea.
Okay, you can listen me. Okay. No, I will try to explain. The problem is, during the last 200 years, we are depend on the fossil fuel, but especially for the oil energetic. But it's impossible to replace the oil. It's impossible to replace the oil with the energy renewable. It's impossible because the oil have some special condition, have a density energy, is easy to transport, it's easy to transform, it's easy to use, and all of our civilization is imprinted for the oil. But the oil, we can continue using oil first for the environmental problem, but second for the easy oil disappear. And we need to look oil in a sea, in the bottom of the sea. We need to look the oil in the forest, in the Amazon, in the important environmental region, and every new project is more have economic costs, high costs, but economic costs, but environmental costs. Yeah, Michael Clare talked about is a extreme energy, because we have less energy, we have more problem, we need more water, we need more land to the new energy, to look new oil reservation, and we need to change everything. We need to deep cultural transformation. This means we need to change the food, our system food consume a lot of energy. We need to change the cities. We need to transform everything. All of our life, we need to transformation. But the problem is we don't want to change, and we plan this transformation, or maybe we live a collapse. No, some people talk about we are living a collapse. We are living a collapse. Maybe the collapse is not like when finish a big collapse, but maybe it's a lot of collapse, and maybe in the future, this privileged class use the privilege to live, and the situation of the most of the population will be deteriorate. That's the problem. This is my point. And when I don't know, remember the name is Rodrigo asked about the Brazil and the Natura and the proposal to continue producing, thinking in a continued economic growth and preservation and environmental preservation. I don't believe it's possible the economy grow with the preservation, environmental preservation, because is totally opposed the environmental preservation with the growth. This is my point. Thank you. I hope you understand me. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So you've responded to Rodrigo's question there. I don't know, Rodrigo, do you want to tease out a little bit more what you were asking, or John, do you want to follow up on what Rodrigo was asking?
Maybe let Rodrigo say something.
Yeah, thank you for taking my question there. I'm just wondering, because these projects are somehow attractive to the mainstream narratives, but also to the communities involved. So when Natura start working in these communities in the Amazon region, it may be attractive to communities to engage in this type of economic activity. And these represent something in terms of an idea of progress or development or whatever. But in fact, in my own take is that it's not considering the communities as part of the environment, and further pushing these communities into the cash economy, and that represents a prioritization. I don't know if that's a word in English, but and then that's something that is very connected to a lot of the ideas of the government at the moment. So they said a few times after they took office that they would show everyone that it is possible to combine the two things, the development and preservation. but not considering this element of, the environment being, also the communities interacting with the environment and the natural environment. So yeah, I thought it was interesting to bring this here because, we're talking about degrowth and we're talking about post-extractivism. So yeah, I hope I was clear enough.
Yeah, perhaps I could respond. I mean, it's a misunderstanding of the post-growth position to think that every sector of the economy has to contract or degrow. I mean, growth is good if it's inclusive, if it includes the communities that growth is being experienced in. I suppose for me, it's to really express the view that a post-growth or degrowth position is purely material. It just means at the macro level of the economy, we can't grow. But within the economy, do we want to grow the nut growing sector and degrow the nuclear weapons sector? Do we want to grow the care and elderly sector and degrow some other sector? What it means is we have to repoliticize how we organize our economy. So please do not understand a post-growth position as meaning every sector of the economy has to degrow. It is not at all that. It's about we are faced with the choice now of choosing which sectors of our economy within the non-negotiable limits. Frankly, colleagues, the planet does not care if you're a Marxist, a socialist, an anarchist, or a capitalist. It's physics. We have non-negotiable limits that we have to live within. But that means there's still lots of opportunity for us to decide. For me, I would like to think that most of us want the life-affirming aspects of our economy. Looking after our elderly, our young, and our old. They're the bits of the economy we want to grow. We want to degrow weapons production, for example. And isn't it curious that in many of our societies, it's easier to find money for war than it is for our healthcare systems? Just look at how, with the war in Ukraine, many European countries of euros to send in aid to the Ukraine, and yet we've been told that our own economies cannot afford housing or healthcare. This is bullshit, complete bullshit. The issue is not the lack of money, it's the lack of political will. So what I like about the post-growth perspective is that it forces us to now start prioritizing where do we put the assets and resources of our society? Do we put them to protect life and livelihoods? Or do we start spending it on bullshit jobs in finance and speculation and weapons manufacturing? This is the real issue we're now faced. We do not face a crisis of fiscal or financial limits. All we face is, what do we want to use the actual material resources of our societies to do? And too often in our media, in the academy, in academic research and so on, we're faced with this kind of, there's a limit to the money we can use. We have this austerity narrative. There's not enough money. That's absolute bullshit. Absolute bullshit. And I use those words not just because I want to be a cool, down with the kids professor, but it is bullshit. The only issue we should ever be concerned with when we look at the economy is not the money, is the actual assets, labor, land, people, capital, resources in our society. So for me, there is no limit when it comes to the imagination about how do we use the resources to create a society where nobody has to go to bed hungry, nobody has to go to bed without a roof over their head. We have all the resources we need, but we have to focus on the issue. Why is it we're not doing this? And it's very simple. The resources of our societies have been accumulated by a minority who are hoarding the assets and resources that we need. Just look at the housing prices in the Republic of Ireland. Don't tell me we haven't got enough land or enough people that can build the houses. It's the political will to release that to make it happen. So I like the post-growth perspective, is that it really forces us to start understanding, how do we as people, as citizens, want to use the resources of our society to develop our society? So in a way, Rodrigo, the idea of having development and growth in a particular area is absolutely fine, so long as the people are included in that, they're happy with that. So we can have, as I say, below the macro level of the economy, we can have all of these growth dynamics, so long as they're inclusive and participative and democratic. But we have to recognize that the state has to manage the economy. I'm giving you here, colleagues, a functional scientific argument for the socialist planned economy. I'm not making this as a normative or ideological point, purely from the point of view of a scientific understanding of the economy. We have to manage the economy at a macro level. We can enable maybe market mechanisms at some levels of the economy, maybe for, sweets or electronic equipment. But I think finally, just to finish, we do have to face the fact that things like energy, education, transport, food, housing, these things in our society must be removed from the market mechanism, because we can, we can more rationally use our resources to meet the needs of people through a planned system, and enable then the market economy for other luxury things in our lives. So I'm not demanding a complete kind of, Soviet-style planned economy for everything, but on these leading aspects of our lives, as I say, health, education, transport, and housing, we have compelling scientific reasons now that we need to move away from a market-based economy.
Great, thank you. Tatiana, you shared a link in the chat box there. Can I ask you to a bit about?
Yes, I would like to refer to two ideas. One is related with the money, like say John. No, some of the most interesting community driving experience have to do with the restoration of territories. There are many experiences that have recovered hundreds of hectares areas of land, forests, water sources, without money, only with their work, only with the community, only with the interest to recover their territory. They do more than the large invest of the corrupt state institution. But what happened is with the institution do well the work. Maybe we can recover our deteriorated areas. Maybe we can have more clean food, or more clean water, or more clean life. Yeah, but the money is using for other things, or is take for the corruptors. Yeah, and the other point I like to talk is about someone asked about North and South relation, the cooperation relation. As the ecosocial and intercultural path of the South, Pacto Ecosocial del Sur, I send the link to the Pacto. We are thinking to expand dialogues between the North and the South, because we consider it's very, very important. Some of the proposals that emerge from the North, like a solution of the crisis, have serious repercussions in our countries. And we need to talk about that. But because in this moment, we have problems in many of our countries with the minerals, but include with the forest. For instance, in Ecuador, is using the balsa. Balsa is a tree to the wood is using for the aeolic projects, and they provocate deforestation of the Amazonas region in Ecuador. But in the north, maybe people is thinking renewable energy is a solution, but have a big problem in our country. We need to understand it's impossible to obtain the solution in one part of the world. It's not thinking in the repercussion in other part of the world. It's important this kind of the event and this kind of relation. And I invite you, Hilary, John, and all of you to share more with PAPTO and with the other initiatives in our country. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. We'd love to. We have two remaining questions from Jay and Juliana, but before we move to them, maybe I'll check in with John. Do you want to jump in here at any point, or will we go straight to Jay and Juliana?
I have spoken far enough, so let's move to questions.
Okay, great. Maybe Jay, do you want to step in here?
Yeah, although John, straight back at you probably, sorry. Just an opportunity to talk on what you mentioned at the beginning. People can see the end of the world before the end of capitalism. And I mentioned Noam Chomsky saying, the end of capitalism might be a desirable goal, but it's a 50 to 100 year project at least. And we don't have that kind of timescale available to us to act on climate change. How do you kind of answer that question if I assume we kind of see capitalism as causal and prior to answering that other question? I suppose we're speaking a little more to, like you said, ideology, political will here. How do we answer that question of timescale and changing capitalism? And how do we start to kind of chip away or make the changes politically on the timescale that we have?
That is the question, Jay. I mean, over 115 years ago, Vladimir Lenin asked the same question. It's essentially in his book, What is to be done? It's the issue of strategy. And I'm not really sure of what the correct strategy is, but I just know that capitalism is ecocidal. Most of the arguments for things like green growth or green capitalism rest largely upon technological decoupling. So in other words, we invent a whiz-bang technology that enables us to continue with this growth-based, expansive capitalist economic system. And sadly, and I mean that very sincerely, because I am a father of 2 children. So I'm speaking to you not just as an activist and academic, but as a father who is very worried about my kids' future. And there is absolutely no hope in hell or heaven of us decoupling a continuing, certainly a carbon-based economic growth system from the biophysical resources and pollution that is produced by it. There is no empirical evidence for this. And what really worries me as an academic, and most of our citizens are not aware of this, is that inbuilt in, for example, the Paris 2015 climate agreement and other climate agreements, is this kind of black box of technology. In other words, our governments are assuming the invention of technological ways of decoupling our energy use and pollution production from endless economic growth. But these technologies are not being actually invented. I mean, to me, that is like mythic thinking. It's witchcraft. It's, forms of magical thinking. But actually, this is seen as serious. And a lot of money is being now invested in things like carbon capture and sequestration, solar radiation management, geoengineering. At billions of taxpayers' money across the European Union, these desperate attempts to continue capitalism and decouple, the negative dimensions of it, And why don't we see the same money being invested in low carbon ways of living, of, you know, investing in the core care economy, of a 3 or 4 day working week, of perhaps even, you know, maybe democratizing workplaces, worker cooperatives as new ways of, you know, creating economic value. And to me, that's the most worrying thing at this current moment, is that serious thinking, including in my own profession in the academy, is being given to bullshit projects at the cost of billions, when actually we have low cost ways of addressing our crisis, but it does require us moving beyond this extractivist system. Now, that's not me through you criticizing Noam Chomsky, because I've not read that piece you referenced. You know, the reality is that capitalism itself is an ecocidal system. So we need to move beyond it as quickly and as equitably as possible. I do think any change begins, and maybe Tatiana would like to make some comment here. I always believed in 3 things for any social movement: educate, which is what we're doing this evening, and I'm sure many of you have, you know, read up on some of these issues. And we need to have more of that education in terms of climate and carbon literacy, of understanding the causes, the consequences, and the solutions to the planetary crisis that we face. But secondly, we need to agitate. It's no good talking, you know, and that's what we often do in the academy. We sit in seminars, we produce research papers, and, you know, but where does that go? So we need to agitate in terms of actually making an impact in our communities. And particularly in terms of, in my view, we are going to need non-violent direct action to make any difference in the situation we're discussing. So we need to educate, we need to agitate, but then the last issue, which we're really bad at, certainly in the academy, is organize. How do we organize our communities to understand? Because for a lot of working class people, degrowth, post-growth, the climate, who cares? These people are struggling to put bread on the table. You know, they may be working 2 or 3 precariously paid jobs and so on. We need to start developing a working class environmentalism. I mean, to end on a quote that I often use from Chico Mendes. Chico Mendes was a Brazilian trade union activist who was murdered, and he said quite wisely, ecology without class politics is gardening. And I think many of us in the global north, that's where green ecological politics lies. It's a form of safe individual responses, whereas actually we need to realize that the climate and ecological challenge is class struggle, because it's the working classes that are most impacted by this. They're the ones who are being dispossessed. And I think we need to, you know, move the green political issue beyond, and again, apologies, I don't want to offend anybody. A lot of green politics, and I speak as a recovering Green Party politician myself, a lot of green politics is the woke, guilty, educated urban middle classes, which has very little resonance with working class people in the global north. And I think that's a major issue we need to overcome, because that's the basis then of solidarity with communities in the global south who are actually suffering the worst impacts of extractivism, of the climate breakdown, and of ecological devastation. So if there's nothing else you recall from tonight, go away remembering Chico Mendes: ecology without class politics is gardening.
Okay, I would like to say two brief comments to finish. First is related with one question related with the woman, and I would like to say women are vital in the transformation, because many of the resistance are led by women in Colombia and in Latin America and in most of the part of the world where people resistant, but also because they hold much of the acknowledgement that needs to be recovered or to transform. For example, the acknowledgement of care work. Most of the care is so important point to transform. Like say, John, maybe I remember John talk about how this kind of work is not recognized for the capitalism, but it's essential for life. It's essential for produce, for everything is essential. And in a proposal in Colombia, women care the biodiversity. They had the huerta. How do you say huerta? Huerta, Xian? Okay.
It's like a garden, but like an allotment.
Yeah, where person conserve or the indigenous people conserve the biodiversity, agro biodiversity, and they have relation with the water. And I think it's very important woman in the transformation. And the second point that I would like to talk is about the times. How somebody asked about, we need 50 years to change, to leave the capitalism. But I would like to say humanity has experienced drastic rapid change during our existence. Some of these change have occurred during wars, like in the UK during Thanos War, is relating with you, and the need to produce food in order not to be defeated by famine during the wars. But and you can in UK change many of the promotes political to produce food, and it's a matter of the political will. Is the political will decide produce change with is the government or the state are interested to produce change. The change can produce in a short time, but we need support, yeah, because it's important. But in this moment, they don't have a political will. No, the government are not interested to, and there are a lot of pressure, like in Colombia, to don't advance in the energy transition. That's the problem, no? But I think that the change is possible if we have a voluntad to change. Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. We have one final question from Juliana. Maybe it's more of a reflection or a thought, but can I check in, Juliana? Is that something that you'd like to share, or maybe I can read it out? I'm going to read it.
Yeah, you can read it. I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay. So Juliana says, I'm involved in the housing movement in Ireland, CATU, Community Action Tenants Union, and I researched the financialisation of housing. I just want to say that I find extractivism very important lens to look at financialisation and different forms of extraction. I learned about the term from environmental groups, and I hope social movements working in distinct fronts can look at extractivism and work together to move forward to a post-extractivist, definancialised world. So thank you to everyone for sharing their views and experience with us this evening. And it really just goes to show how so many of these different issues and struggles are intersecting. They connect to each other and overlap with each other and feed into each other, and we learn from each other through them too. So it's thanks, Juliana. Does anyone have any fun reflections to share here, just as we're closing?
Could I just say that, you know, in reference to Juliana's, is to understand that extractivism is not just about the expropriation of resources. It's also got to do with the expropriation of the necessities of life, such as housing and energy and food, or indeed the way in which our imaginaries are colonized by social media, for example. You know, we've got to understand extractivism not just as a historical moment of colonialism. It is a method by which the powerful and an economic elite can actually extract value even from our consciousness. You know, many of us are kind of aware because we're on social media and so on. It is purely run algorithmically for profit making and so on. So even our very attention, you know, and I see it in the young people I teach and even in my own children, that FOMO, fear of missing out, that constant sense of needing to be, you know, connected in. It's a way, in a way, of colonizing, as I say, our imagination and our attention. So I think extractivism is a very powerful concept. And it's not just, as I say, for historical reasons of colonialism, or it's geographically specific to Ireland or South America, but actually it's the operating system of capitalism is around colonizing and expropriating, you know, every bit of life, land, you know, labor, our attention. And I think for me, that is insufficiently understood, even amongst those on the left or progressives, is that this is like a vampire. Capitalism is like a vampire that is preying upon, as I say, life, labor, land, and now even our very consciousness and attention. And it's extremely successful at doing that. We need to be aware of it. How we respond to it, of course, is a big issue and so on. But I just want to let people know that for me, extractivism, as I say, is not just a historical event. It's not just geographically specific, but as I say, it's the operating logic of this system that we live within called capitalism.
Yeah, like say, Horacio Machado is a system. It's a system. It's a true civilization, said him, Horacio, an economical, political, social, and cultural. It is very important, cultural system, because it's not only material, it's immaterial too. It's immaterial, it's a form to think about the work. And it's a colonialism, finally.
Great. Thank you so much, Tatiana and John. Really wonderful contributions, so rich and insightful and helpful to get us beyond growth. So thanks everyone for coming along this evening and sharing your wonderful insights and questions and reflections. I'll be sending a follow-up email. If you want to stay in contact with each other, let me encourage you to share your email contacts in the chat box here. You can copy each other's contacts if that's useful to you. And stay tuned with us. There'll be more seminars and events and educational projects coming up over the months ahead. So stay tuned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Hilary. Thanks, Tatiana. Listen, comrades, I'll see you in the trenches or the victory parade.
Yes.
Thank you. La lucha continúa.
No
Thank you.
pasará.
Thank you, John and Tatiana. Thanks, everybody.
Good evening.
Thank you both so much.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Ciao.
Ciao. Good night. Hey.
Okay, let me stop recording.